The gray wig was scratching the back of my neck, and I kept resisting the urge to pull at it. 41 years of marriage, and it had come to this, me standing in the coat-check alcove of the Harborview Country Club, dressed in a catering uniform I'd rented from a costume shop in Westport, trying not to catch my own reflection in the gilded mirror above the entrance table. I'd chosen the gray wig on purpose. If anyone looked too closely at my face, they'd assume the hair matched the age. They'd look away. People always look away from old women in service uniforms. That, I had learned in 63 years of living, was both the sorrow and the usefulness of being invisible. My husband's retirement party had started 20 minutes ago. I wasn't supposed to be there. I want to back up, because the way I ended up in that alcove with a tray of champagne flutes and a pounding heart didn't happen overnight. It happened the way most devastating things happen, slowly, in small pieces, each one explying itself before you'd even had a chance to examine it. My husband and I met when we were both 22. He was finishing his MBA at Boston University. I was a nursing student who worked weekends at the diner 2 blocks from his campus. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee, wheat toast, 2 eggs over easy, and he always left an embarrassingly large tip. I used to tell that story at dinner parties for years. How the tip was what got my attention first. How generosity was the thing that made me look up. For 30 years, I believed I had married a generous man. We settled in Darien, Connecticut. He built his career in commercial real estate development. I worked as a pediatric nurse for 26 years before taking early retirement to care for my mother during her final illness. By the time my mother passed, I was 58, and my husband was already talking about his own retirement. Big plans, Europe in the spring, a place on the Cape, mornings with no alarm clock. I believed all of it. I had no reason not to. Then, 14 months ago, I noticed the second phone. It wasn't hidden particularly well. It was tucked inside the inner breast pocket of his winter overcoat, the charcoal wool one he only wore to evening events. I found it by accident when I was taking the coat to the dry cleaner in November. A small, plain smartphone, no case, a number I didn't recognize on the screen from a missed call. I stood in the kitchen holding it for a long time. Then I put it back exactly where I found it and drove to the dry cleaner without the coat. I didn't confront him. I know people wonder about that, why don't women just ask? But I was 62 years old. I had watched my own mother stay in a marriage that was wrong for her because she asked too soon, showed her hand before she had anything solid, and spent 20 more years being gaslit into thinking she was the unstable one. I had made myself a quiet promise when I was a girl that I would never be in that position, that if I ever found myself at that crossroads, I would know before I spoke. So I watched, and I listened, and slowly, the picture came into focus. The calls that went to voicemail whenever I was in the room, the evenings at client dinners that ran later and later, the new gym membership he never seemed to use, the way he'd stopped reaching for my hand at restaurants, something so small and so specific that I could feel the exact date it stopped, the way you can feel a tooth go loose before it falls. 6 months ago, I called my college roommate, who is now a family law attorney in Hartford. I told her what I suspected. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Before you do anything, you need to know what you're dealing with financially. Because if he's planning to leave, and he has the kind of assets your husband has, there are things people do ahead of time. Quiet things, things that are very hard to undo once they're done." I didn't sleep well after that conversation. I hired a forensic accountant through my attorney's referral network. A quiet, professional woman named Diane who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and communicated almost entirely by encrypted email. Over the following 3 months, Diane began to find things. Small transfers. A limited liability company formed 18 months ago in Delaware that I had never heard of. A brokerage account in my husband's name only that had recently been seeded with a significant transfer from our joint investment portfolio transfers that, on the surface, looked like routine rebalancing, but that Diane flagged as a pattern she had seen before. A pattern of what? I asked her. A pattern of someone quietly moving assets out of marital reach, she said, before initiating a divorce. I sat with that for 3 days. Then I called my attorney back. The retirement party had been planned for months. 60 guests, a private dining room at the Harborview, a catered dinner by a company called Coastal Table. My husband had handled most of the arrangements himself, which I had found slightly odd at the time. He was not a man who enjoyed logistical details, but I hadn't pressed it. 2 weeks before the party, I received an anonymous text message on my personal phone. I still don't know who sent it. The message said only, "She'll be there Saturday night. Front table. He's been introducing her as his partner." I read it 4 times. Then I forwarded it to my attorney and put my phone face down on the counter and made myself a cup of tea that I didn't drink. My attorney called within the hour. "You need to be careful," she said. "Don't confront him at the party. Don't make a scene. But if you can get inside that room and see what's happening for yourself, it could matter. It could matter a great deal, actually, depending on what you see and who sees it with you." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean witnesses," she said. "I mean documentation. I mean that if your husband has been openly conducting a relationship with someone while simultaneously moving marital assets into separate accounts, a room full of his colleagues who have seen this woman on his arm is a very useful thing to have on the record." I thought about that for a long time after I hung up. I called the catering company the next morning. I told the woman who answered that I was following up about Saturday's event at the Harborview. I said I was an experienced server looking for extra holiday work, and I asked if they needed additional staff for the Callaway retirement dinner. There was a pause, some clicking of a keyboard, and she said, "Yes, actually, they'd had someone call out, 'Could I do a 6 o'clock call time?' And I said yes without hesitating." I spent the rest of the week preparing. I drove to a theatrical supply shop in Norwalk and bought the gray wig, a pair of non-prescription glasses with thick frames, and a stage-quality foundation 2 shades darker than my own complexion. My husband had never seen me in glasses. I had laser correction done 15 years ago, and the change to my hairline and face shape was more dramatic than I'd expected when I tried it all together in the bathroom. Mirror. I looked like a stranger. I looked like someone's grandmother who worked hard and had good posture. I looked, in other words, exactly like someone a room full of corporate guests would smile at briefly and forget. I practiced carrying a tray for 2 evenings, using a baking sheet and some mason jars, until I could navigate the kitchen island without a sound. My daughter called me the Thursday before the party. She lives in Portland now with her husband and my 2 granddaughters, and we talk every Thursday without fail. I almost told her everything. She was suspicious she'd been suspicious of her father for longer than I had, though she'd never said it directly, just hinted at things the way adult children do when they're trying to protect a parent from something the parent might not be ready to hear. Instead, I told her I was going to a friend's dinner party Saturday and asked her to send me a picture of the girls. She sent 6. I looked at those 6 photographs for a long time that night, those 2 small, serious faces that looked so much like mine at their age, and I thought about what kind of woman I wanted to be when this was over. Not angry. Not small. Not someone who let the worst thing that had ever happened to her become the defining thing about her. I wanted to come out of this hole. I arrived at the Harborview at 5:45 on Saturday evening. The catering crew was friendly and efficient. The event manager, a young man named Tyler who couldn't have been older than 25, handed me a black apron and a printed sheet showing the layout of the tables and the evening's service timeline. He told me I'd be working the main floor champagne service during cocktail hour, wine service during dinner, clearing between courses. I nodded and folded the sheet and put it in my apron pocket and went to find my station. The Harborview's main dining room overlooks the harbor, and in December, the lights of the boats reflect off the water in a way that's genuinely beautiful. I had been in that room before, as a guest, at other people's celebrations. Standing in it with a tray felt strange in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not humiliating, exactly, but clarifying. Like seeing a room from an angle you'd never considered. Guests began arriving at 6:30. I knew most of them by name or by sight. My husband's business partner and his wife, who had been to our house for dinner a dozen times. The vice president of acquisitions, a tall man with a silver beard who always wore bow ties. The company's longtime attorney, who had drafted documents for us personally over the years. I moved through them with my tray of champagne flutes, and not one of them looked at my face for more than a fraction of a second. My husband arrived at 6:47. He was wearing the navy suit I had helped him pick out last spring. He looked relaxed and happy in a way that I realized, with a sudden clarity, I hadn't seen in a very long time. He was laughing at something before he even came through the door, tilted toward the person beside him the way you tilt toward someone whose company you genuinely enjoy. The person beside him was a woman. She was younger than me by at least 20 years. Professionally dressed, dark hair, confident in her posture. She walked into the room the way people walk into rooms they feel they belong in, and when my husband placed his hand at the small of her back to guide her through the entrance, the gesture was practiced, easy. The gesture of two people who had been doing this for a while. I watched them from across the room. I held my tray steady. I breathed. I had expected this moment to break me open. I had prepared myself for it in the abstract. The way you prepare for a surgery, you know it will hurt. You've read what to expect. But the specific sensation is always its own thing. What I actually felt, standing there with a tray of champagne glasses while my husband of 41 years walked into his retirement party with another woman, was something quieter and more absolute than I'd anticipated. It felt like the last piece of a puzzle finally locking into place. Everything I had suspected, everything Diane had found, every late evening and erased call log and hollow reassurance, it all completed itself in the simple picture of those two people walking through that door. I served champagne. I smiled professionally when guests took glasses. I cleared an empty glass from a side table and replaced a cocktail napkin and moved through the room like I was supposed to be there, because I was supposed to be there, and no one had any idea who I was. About 40 minutes into cocktail hour, I was near the east wall refilling my tray from the bar service station when I heard her name for the first time. Two of my husband's younger colleagues were standing nearby, and they were not being particularly quiet. She's been coming to the Boston office for 8 months now? At least. He introduced her at the Harbor Associates dinner in the spring. Does his wife know? A pause, and then a lowered voice that I still heard completely clearly. I don't think so. I got the sense that's still very much a separate situation. I set a champagne flute on my tray without making a sound. A separate situation. 41 years and 2 children and a house full of photographs, and I was a separate situation. I excused myself past a group near the window and made my way toward the hallway that led to the restrooms and the private telephone alcove near the coat check, a small, curtained nook that the club maintained for members who wanted privacy. I had noticed it when I arrived and filed it away. Old habits from a life spent in environments where you learned the layout before anything else. I was coming back from the service station when I saw my husband slip into that alcove. I don't know exactly what made me follow him. Instinct, maybe. Or the forensic accountant's voice in the back of my mind saying, documentation. I moved down the hallway and stopped just outside the curtain, back against the wall, and I stood absolutely still. He was on the phone. His regular phone. I recognized his voice cadence immediately, that particular lowered tone he used when he was discussing something he considered serious. No, I told you, the filing won't happen until February, he said. After the first of the year. The accountant needs the transfer documentation cleaned up before we go to the attorney. A pause while he listened. She has no idea, he said. She's been completely in the dark. By the time she gets a lawyer up to speed, it'll be 6 months minimum before anyone starts untangling the Delaware structure, and by then, we'll have— He paused again. I know. This time next year, we'll be looking at properties in Scottsdale. I already have someone I trust down there. Just let me get through tonight and I'll call you tomorrow. I heard him end the call. I moved back down the hallway before he came out. I stood in the kitchen staging area for approximately 90 seconds. Tyler, the event manager, came in and asked if I was all right, and I told him I was fine, just getting my bearings, and he nodded and went back out. In those 90 seconds, I made a decision. It was not an impulsive decision. I want to be clear about that, because what I did next might look, from the outside, like a woman losing her composure at a party, and that is not what happened. What happened was a woman making a calm and considered choice about exactly how much of her own story she was willing to let someone else control. I had my attorney's number in my phone, which was in my bag in the coat check. I retrieved the phone, stepped into the back hallway, and sent her a single text message. I told her what I had just heard. I told her the specific words, the transfer documentation, the Delaware structure, February, after the first of the year. I told her where I was, and that I needed her to be available first thing Monday morning. She responded in under 2 minutes. "I'm here, Monday 8 a.m. You're going to be okay." I put my phone back in my bag and went to finish the job I'd been hired to do. Dinner service began at 8. I worked my section, poured wine, smiled at people I had known for decades, and not one of them knew they were looking at me. About midway through the main course, the business partner stood and tapped his wine glass. "I've been asked to say a few words," he said, and the room quieted. "About a man who has, for the past 32 years, been my business partner, my colleague, and my friend." He gave a generous speech. He talked about my husband's instincts, his work ethic, his ability to build trust with people. He talked about a specific deal they'd closed in 1998 that nearly fell apart and didn't because of my husband's persistence. He talked about what it meant to hand over the reins to the next generation knowing the foundation was solid. He raised his glass. "To a man who built something worth building," he said. "And to the next chapter, whatever it holds." The room raised their glasses. My husband stood and thanked everyone. He was gracious and warm and funny, and the room loved him, and he was very, very good at this, at being the man everyone in the room believed he was. He did not mention me. He did not mention his wife of 41 years, the woman who had worked alongside him and raised their children and driven to hospitals at 2 a.m, and held the household together through every expansion and contraction of a career that had depended, in ways I don't think he ever fully acknowledged, on having a stable and competent person at home. He thanked his colleagues. He thanked the club staff. He raised a private little smile in the direction of the woman at the front table. He did not say my name once. I cleared his dinner plate 20 minutes later. I set down his dessert course. He looked right through me the way he looked right through every person in a service uniform, and I thought, there it is. There is the thing I needed to see. Not the other woman. Not the phone call. This. The 41-year habit of looking right through the person standing closest to you. I worked until the end of service at 10:30. I helped break down the tables, stripped my apron, thanked Tyler, and drove home. In the kitchen, I took off the wig and set it on the counter. I washed my face at the kitchen sink and stood there for a long time with the water running, looking out at the backyard. The oak tree we'd planted the year our son was born was black against the December sky. I thought about the morning we planted it, how young we were, how certain everything had seemed. Then I dried my hands and went to bed. Monday morning, I was at my attorney's office at 8 o'clock sharp. I brought Diane's reports, my own notes, and a summary of what I had heard in the telephone alcove, which I had written out in full detail the moment I'd gotten home Saturday night while it was still fresh. My attorney read everything carefully, asked several precise questions, and then sat back in her chair and looked at me. "You know this is going to be a significant legal process," she said. "I know," I said. "And you understand that some of your marital assets may be difficult to fully recover depending on how far the transfers have progressed." "I understand." She leaned forward. "You also understand that what you did on Saturday going into that event, hearing what you heard, that's not nothing. Combined with Diane's documentation, we have a picture here that a judge is going to take seriously." I nodded. "How are you doing?" she asked, and I knew she meant it genuinely. The way people who have spent their careers in the wreckage of marriages learn to ask that question differently than other people do. I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I'm not angry," I said. I was, for a while. I think I was angry for most of last year, without letting myself call it that. But sitting in that room Saturday, watching everything confirm itself, I think I moved past anger. I think I just want it to be over. I want it handled correctly and fairly, and I want to come out of it with my dignity and enough to live well. That's all. She nodded slowly. "That," she said, "is an excellent place to start." The legal process took 11 months. It was not simple and it was not painless, but it was thorough. Diane's documentation held up. The Delaware LLC and the brokerage transfers were ruled by the court to be dissipation of marital assets, a legal finding that significantly affected the settlement calculation in my favor. The retirement accounts, the equity in the house, and a portion of the transferred funds were all addressed in the final decree. My husband did not contest everything. I think he knew, somewhere in that ruthlessly practical part of his mind, that he had been outmaneuvered by someone he had long ago stopped paying attention to, and that pressing too hard would only make things worse for him. His attorney was careful. My attorney was better. The house sold in the spring. I had expected that to be the hardest part, and it was, but not for the reason I thought. It wasn't the rooms or the furniture or the oak tree in the backyard that got to me. It was standing in the empty kitchen the morning of closing and realizing that I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I had been carrying something heavy for so long I'd stopped noticing the weight, and now I could feel the absence of it in my shoulders, in my chest, in the way I was breathing. I bought a smaller house in Mystic. 2 bedrooms, good light, a back porch that looks over a tidal creek. My daughter came up from Portland with the girls for the first weekend, and we sat on that porch until the mosquitoes drove us inside, and my older granddaughter, who is 7 and ferociously curious about everything, asked me if I liked my new house better than the old one. I thought about it. I like it more honestly, I said. She chewed on that for a second. What does that mean? It means it fits me better, I said. The old house fit who I was a long time ago. This one fits who I am now. She accepted that with the uncomplicated logic of 7-year-olds and went back to trying to catch fireflies off the porch railing. I'm telling this story now because I think there are women who need to hear it. Not to give them a blueprint, every situation is its own thing, with its own complexities and its own risks, and I am not suggesting that anyone do what I did without very careful thought and very good legal counsel. What I am saying is something simpler and maybe more important. I am 63 years old. I spent 41 years in a marriage that I believed in completely, and it turned out to be something other than what I thought it was. That is a loss. I don't minimize it. There were real things in that marriage, real years, real love in the early part of it, real family that I would not trade for anything. But I also made a choice, at a moment when I could have crumbled, to use everything I knew, every instinct, every skill, every bit of patience I had developed over 6 decades of living to face the situation with my eyes open. I chose not to be surprised. I chose to understand before I acted. I chose to walk into that room on my own terms. Nobody handed me that. I built it out of what I had. The gray wig is still in a bag in my hall closet. My granddaughter found it last month and put it on and paraded around the kitchen making voices, and I laughed until I couldn't breathe. Later, after they'd gone to bed, I took it out and held it in my hands for a minute. It looks like something out of a costume shop, which is exactly what it is. It looks slightly ridiculous, but when I held it, I thought about the woman who wore it calm, clear-eyed, moving through a room full of people who didn't see her, and I didn't feel ridiculous at all. I felt, if I'm honest, a little proud of her. You spend your whole life being told that the thing that makes you invisible is a weakness. Your age, your gender, the uniform, the role, the way the world has trained itself to look right through you. And maybe for a long time you believe that, because the people doing the looking are confident and loud, and they move through rooms like they own them, and they have never once had to think about how to become undetectable. But invisibility, when you choose it yourself, on your own terms, for your own reasons, that is not a weakness, that is a tool. And I have never met a woman over 60 who didn't have a lifetime of tools she'd never been asked to use. I have a good life now. A quieter life in some ways, but a more honest one. I wake up in my house in Mystic, and I make coffee, and I sit on the back porch and watch the light come up over the creek, and I think about what I want the rest of my life to look like. Not what's left of it. I genuinely dislike that framing. What I'm building now. My attorney sent me a card after the settlement closed. It said simply, "You handled that with more grace than most people manage in situations like this." I hope you know that. I keep it on my kitchen windowsill. I look at it sometimes when I'm washing dishes. I think about grace, what it actually means, not the word as a compliment, but the thing itself. I think it means something like doing what you have to do without losing sight of who you are. Letting things be as hard as they actually are, without pretending they're not, and still coming out the other side of them as yourself. That's what I wanted at the beginning of all this. That's what I came out with. And it turns out that after 63 years, after a 41-year marriage and 2 children and a career and a mother I cared for at the end of her life, and a house I sold and a new house I bought and a retirement party I attended in disguise, it turns out that knowing who you are, firmly and without apology, is the one thing no transfer document can touch. Nobody can move that asset offshore. It stays with you, exactly where you put it, for as long as you choose to keep it.